Hello, everyone. Welcome to Around Town TV, Minnesota's lifestyle and business experts. We've been bringing you the best kept secrets, businesses, organizations, and people since 2003. We are the Twin Cities' longest airing television community showcase. I am your host, Carla Berlin, and tonight I have a very special guest. Freelance investigative journalist, member of FindJodi Inc., a nonprofit team dedicated to finding missing Iowa anchorwoman Jodi Huisentruit. She is also a 2025 inductee into the Minnesota Broadcasters Hall of Fame. Please welcome Caroline Lowe. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me and giving us this opportunity to talk about Jodi at such a significant time in her disappearance.
Well, and for those who maybe aren't familiar or don't remember, like I had the honor of working with you at WCCO TV back in 1997, 98. Tell us a little bit about your history and background in journalism, crime, and law enforcement.
Well, thank you. I started WCCO as a newsroom clerk at about $125 a week on 15th, 1977, about the same time Mary Tyler Moore's show was going off the air. And I was in the basement of the old CCO studios on South 9th Street, answering phones, filing film, running errands, and gradually worked my way into what they called a research position, basically a person helping the reporters, but not going on the air. And then eventually became a reporter. I had people like Dave Moore, Don Shelby. Dave Moore would come in on his days off and spend time with me for practicing my reading. Don did a lot of journalism training with me. I had no formal journalism training. My newsroom, my journalism school was WCCO. The photographers were key. I would go out after hours, ride with them and learn. And I was like a weed that just kind of grew and kind of stumbled into the crime beat. I'd never really been around crime and reporting. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I just was never, I was interested in politics back then. But I found that I became pretty intrigued on the crime beat, got to know some families and victims, and felt a real sense of compassion and a sense of wanting to dig and help them get justice with some of our stories. And one thing led to another, and I eventually became their full-time crime reporter. And then did more and more investigative things. If I'd find a tip on something, maybe go off the daily news for a while. But most of the time in the 34 years I was at WCCO, I was a crime reporter.
Well, and I followed you. I've always admired you and followed you. So it's such a treat and honor to have you on the show. And I know that we're coming off a big anniversary. And for those who aren't familiar, maybe talk a little bit about that and the gathering you just had in Mason City, Iowa.
Thank you. We were in Mason City on Friday. It was the 30th, I hate the word anniversary, but for lack of a word, the 30th observance of when Mason City, Iowa morning anchor Jodi Huisentruit was abducted on her way to work. And it's been a mystery ever since. I started covering the story 2 years later. There was a Minnesota rapist that we were looking into. Police eventually ruled him out, but that was 28 years ago. And I never imagined 28 years later, I'd still be working on it. Now I live in California and I'm part of the FindJodi team of, it's mostly journalists because people ask why we do so much with Jodi. Jodi was one of ours. That morning, June 27th, about 4:30 in the morning, Jodi was going to work. Somebody stopped Jodi from going to work, stopped her from living her life more than her 27 years. And our goal is to never stop searching for answers. So we hold this annual event, very powerful one this year. It was probably the most emotional, the biggest gathering we've had. And I'm amazed at some of Jodi's friends and her coworkers at KIMT, the station where she worked, as they powered through their grief and shared their memories of Jodi and also what it's like to live all these years with no answers. And being there, I'm glad I had on sunglasses because the tears were going. I felt very impactful, and we live streamed it, and you can see it on FindJodi on our YouTube channel. But I'm hoping if somebody's watching this or any of the things we did, that one, if it's a person who was involved, to know we're not going away. To do the police chief Jeff Brinkley from Mason City said it's never too late to do the right thing. Do the right thing, even if it's anonymously, and you don't implicate yourself. Tell us where Jodi remains, so she can go home to Long Prairie, Minnesota. And then we're not having these annual things in Mason City, but her family deserves to have their own service in Minnesota.
Well, and that's true. If you're watching and you know somebody or you know who did it, even if you don't want to implicate yourself, let us know, let Caroline know where Jodi is. If you know where Jodi is, that is the most important thing. Just like in the Jacob Wetterling case that you and I, Caroline, talked about off camera earlier, it's never too late. And they just want answers.
And for the families, they don't like the word closure, but there's resolution. And I know I covered Jacob and Jodi both for many years before we moved here to California, covered it for a long time. And then I brought their photos with me everywhere I go. And I know, as awful, as horrific as the ending was in Jacob, then I remember sitting in the courtroom back in Minneapolis and listening to the terrible details of what Danny Heinrich said he did with Jacob, and the Wetterlings were across the aisle. But it was still better for them to have him home, to have their own service, to get what remains of his little hockey jacket that he had. That's what Jodi's family wants. They want her home. They don't want to keep, every time there's a new development or some remains are found in Iowa, I quickly try to find out if it's not Jodi, so I can let them know, so they don't go through that wondering, could it be this person? What did he do in this crime? Did he treat Jodi that way? It's a thing to have it.
Well, and grief is not linear, and not having answers. Like I said to you off camera earlier, I can't even imagine. So again, if somebody knows something and you're watching this, it's never too late to do the right thing. If you're not comfortable posting publicly, reach out to me privately. You can also, and I will get you privately to Caroline. You can also, above this video is FindJodi.inc. We're going to get into that, as well as her family's page. Go to either one of those. We will, there are ways to reach us and to communicate with us, and we will get you to the right people and make sure that you're protected.
Yes, and I would also encourage people to go to the Mason City Police. Their phone number is on our flyer, or the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. But if you're not comfortable going to the police, come to us. My point is, don't sit on it. Don't make this go through another year, another birthday, another Christmas, not knowing where Jodi is. They go on with their lives, but they live with that grief and unknown side by side in their lives every single day.
Oh, can't even imagine. What is FindJodi.com?
Find Jodi was created back in 2003 by two Minnesota television journalists, Josh Benson and Gary Peterson. They were at KIMT-TV in Austin, and Gary was a news director, and Josh was a young reporter. They're from Minnesota. And after they did a series of stories called the Huisentruit Files, they wanted to do more. Like all of us who get involved, invested in Jodi's case, we don't want to let it go. And they took it a step farther. They created Find Jodi. And over the years, we've had some different members. I joined after, I was invited by Josh to join after I actually moved to California. So that's been 14 years. And we're mostly journalists. We have a podcast host. We've done 35 podcast episodes. And Scott, who's now in Wyoming, is with us. Our most recent additions to the team are Brian Wise. He is a photographer at KAL television photographer in Minnesota, and Holly Kegel, who spent 31 years as a Minneapolis police officer, investigator, supervisor. And also, besides Josh Benson, his wife, Tara Manis Benson. And so they're in Florida. We're spread over 4 states. No small challenges involved, but because of the internet and all the tech tools we have, we're able to pull this off. And our main goal is, we know how to keep things visible. We know what gets covered as television journalists. We are also diggers. So we do a lot of digging. We go down a lot of rabbit holes that go nowhere. We are a nonprofit. We get by on very little money. The main thing our money has gone to when we've had donations is we put up billboards. Starting on Jodi's 50th birthday in 2018, we put up 3 billboards in Mason City. We put new ones, continue to keep them up there, because we want Jodi to be visible in Mason City, because there could still be answers there. And until Jodi is found, I said, I'll go work as a greeter at Walmart, or whatever we need to do to put billboards up, keep Jodi visible.
I love that. And you mentioned Brian Wise, and earlier in the day when you were in Mason City, Iowa, I understand that was it you and Brian that went to Jodi's apartment?
Yeah.
Is that correct? And at this exact time she was abducted, just to kind of get a feel for things. Tell us about that.
was, I guess, surreal is one word. I debated. I thought, oh my gosh, I've got this thing I have to coordinate in a few hours, but I knew I wouldn't sleep much anyway. And Brian had said to me, "You want to go?" And I did that 28 years ago as a reporter. I'd been back to the apartment complex many times. I'd never been back at the same time. And we just went there, and as you tell, the best homicide investigators have always told me the crime scene talks to you. You may not hear what it's saying, but just
Mm.
and that's the apartment complex. It's a little horseshoe complex, 3 buildings. Jodi's in one that lived in one that faced the parking lot. I keep thinking, what are we missing? It looks the same, other than a paint job. It looks the same in better lighting than it, as it did 30 years ago. Just kept saying, Jodi, I kind of said, Jodi, tell us what we're missing. And we study crime scene photos all the time. And is it staring right at us? And we know that she grabbed from behind as she was getting into her Mazda Miata. And I think you've seen the video we've done. It's called 30 Seconds. It was 30 seconds from the time Jodi left her second floor apartment, went down the stairs, out 12 steps from the building to her car. So whoever took her, it happened so fast. But 30 seconds, 30 years later, she's missing. We know who did it. Could not have been someone just driving down Kentucky Avenue, the main road by her building. He would not have had time. So it was either somebody who knew her or somebody who got to know her through a lot of information. For example, her phone number and address were all public back then. Her schedule was the same every morning. Other tenants in the building complex told me they could see her sometimes getting ready for work, the light go out. So she would have been very, very easy to stalk. And we do know that there was at least one stalking incident that she reported to police the previous fall. A person in a white that spooked her enough to call police. And from being in TV, we don't you don't call police the first time somebody stares at you. Jodi had to be spooked enough by that person's behavior that she called. Now, we don't know if that same person had anything to do with what happened to Jodi, but she did have a feeling in those months leading up to her disappearance that she was being followed, being stalked.
Wow. Yes. And I have been stalked, and I've had anonymous letters sent to me, even though I'm not listed and I'm protected, as we talked about earlier. People can find that info.
Easier, yeah, it definitely was easy. So you keep thinking all the scenarios, and people say, is it connected to TV? We don't know, but we know that she was doing what we do, going to work, and that's how it happened. Until we know otherwise, I think that has to definitely continue to be explored as a theory. Maybe it'll turn out to be somebody she knows. We know the statistics point that way, but to me, it's still very much a mystery that needs to be solved for her family, and the community needs it. It's still, one public official told me recently, it's been a black eye for 30 years, the city has felt. And it's not their fault, but they still are associated. When you tell somebody you're going to Mason City, when I flew into Minneapolis, St. Paul, right away, someone knew it was about Huisentruit.
Absolutely. Well, and I think about when we talk about even Jacob Wetterling and Danny Heinrich, they're in the same area all those years, living, going to the local bar, the groceries. I mean, that's frightening.
And it shows you can kind of live there in plain sight. And yeah, he was there after year and never went away. And what they had going for the investigators had going for them in that case is they had Jared Shirel, someone else who had been attempted abduction, but he was released. You also had eyewitnesses, and in Jared Shirel's case, they had some DNA they were able to test. We don't know how much potential DNA in Jodi's case. We know there's a partial palm print on the car, and we know there's one hair. Detectives have not said much. The partial palm print has been compared against a number of criminals and rapists over the years, and none of them have been connected. But it also could be a friend of Jodi's. It could be someone who walked through the parking lot. We don't know that it's never related, but you hope that there's something there, because you can get touch DNA off that sort of evidence. So we hope so.
Well, and I don't know if this is true. This would be some of your expertise and background, but when I received 11 anonymous harassment letters from, it started in about this time, 2015. They would take breaks, and it went till July 26th of 2019. And the PD told me, and I had moved 3 times, and they knew my address, so it wasn't forwarded. And the PD told me it's usually someone who knows you very well. And they felt
that's what the statistics are, but I've also covered Danny Heinrich didn't know Jacob Wetterling, and they looked closely at the neighbor, if you may recall, who lived up the cloud that hung over him, the searches that were done tearing up his property. And, I sat and had tea with him at one point for 3 hours after Heinrich was charged, and he still had that cloud, and his parents live with it. What a horrific thing. So you have to keep an open mind to what it
Absolutely.
is.
What, I know we've talked about this offline, and this is it seems very important to you. Maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but Jodi beyond the abduction. Let's talk about Jodi, her background, her hopes, her dreams.
Jodi was, I'd say, feisty, disciplined. We've been doing a number of stories with people who know Jodi. We've been posting much of the month of June and putting memories, largely to capture Jodi beyond what happened to her. And one of my favorites was her golf course. She was a very accomplished golfer. In fact, she was golfing the day before in a tournament until it got rained out, a community fundraiser. And when she was in third grade, she got her first golf clubs. And I remember her coach telling me, John Stefanich back in Long Prairie, that when he found out she was going to be in his class, I think it was sixth grade, then, oh no, she was so obnoxious. And when he told his wife that, and he dreaded it, but he said he went and had her as a student. She became sort of a worst to first. She would go after school, want to practice. She did till she had 10 perfect shots. They became very close. She went on to, with her best friend, be part of the state golf high school gals championship on 2 teams. So she's very, very accomplished athlete. She also was on student council in high school. She did basketball, baseball, so a lot of things. And then she went on to college. She started briefly at Moorhead and transferred to St. Cloud State studying communications, and spent 6 months abroad with some friends in England who they were some of the people who spoke at our service on Saturday. A lot of just great Jodi stories. And then briefly, again, after she graduated, she worked as a flight attendant. She kind of had it maybe to see the world. So she worked for the old Northwest for 6 months. And I think then there were layoffs. And she told a friend at one point that one of the other flight attendants, she thought her career was on the air, not in the air. And she might be the next Barbara Walters. So she had a lot of dreams and ambitions. And her first job out of college, after she did the flight attendants, is she worked at KGAN for about a year in Cedar Rapids, and then she did her first anchor reporter job back in Alexandria, Minnesota, which is great because her mom and family could watch her. She was there for a year or two, and then she went to Mason City, became the morning anchor. Everyone you talk to in Mason City has stories of seeing her at the grocery store, seeing one of the now sheriff remembers seeing her at 2 in the morning or 2:30 in the morning going in at the gas station and she's getting coffee. And they have so many stories of just her personality, much more. I don't have that. I'm a maybe decent crime reporter. I never had that it factor that Jodi had. It was that special thing that jumped out as an anchor in the morning news. And unfortunately, that could be what made somebody connect with her or feel they had a connection with her. We don't know that, but I think that's definitely a risk factor in terms of what happened. She's the youngest of 3 girls. Her father died and she was just 13. She had cancer. Her mom has since passed away, so she passed away without getting answers. Her contract was up in the fall, so she was looking to move on. She'd been there about a year and a half at KIMT, and she bought a kind of sporty little Mazda Miata just a few weeks before she was abducted, which made me think, and we know she was looking at the Twin Cities in part to be near her folks, family, but I think she also had her eye from what we heard on warmer climates, because I don't think you buy something like that, or maybe it's just being 27 you do. But
Could be just 27. I had a Ford Probe,
well,
red one. Yes.
she beyond being very ambitious in terms of her career, she wanted to have a family, settle down, and she wanted to just do what thousands of other people do. And it's just sort of, it's hard to reconcile the person who the day before was at the golf tournament, and then one of her best friends in Mason City spoke at our event on Friday. She was with her that weekend water skiing, and Joe, I mean, it just seemed like things were in a great place, getting a little restless, ambitious wise, but that's so typical. That's the whole small
Right.
market thing that you do, and then you move to another one. And but she's loving summer. She loved to go to Clear Lake. She'd had a surprise birthday party just a few weeks before, and one of the funny anecdotes that her friend told is how good Jodi was at water skiing, and the cake she had made for Jodi had a water skier. But after a little while, and Jodi loved it, but then she went and the gal on the cake had long hair. Jodi got a knife and cut it off short like hers. So, and she just seemed like a lot of things were going very well in her life, and nothing that makes sense other than there had been incidents of stalking, and she told some people at the golf tournament she'd been getting some phone calls, but we don't know if those are connected. We know there's things going on. Sometimes those things are going on, but whether that's connected to what happened to her, we don't know.
And for those tuning in, the other thing is, this was back in the 90s before cell phones. I mean, there were, but people like her and I in that age didn't have them. There weren't ways to trace the phone calls like there are now.
No, they could trace things like we do know the night before she made a phone call at 8:24 long distance, so that sort of thing could trace, but it wasn't as easy. And there were no surveillance cameras in the parking lot. After Jodi disappeared, when police went door to door asking neighbors things, some people said a couple said they heard a scream around 4:20, 4:30. Nobody called police. Sometimes they heard screams from the campgrounds behind her, but the person who took her got 3 hours before police got called by, and it was just a welfare check. I think her producer who at the time, and she spoke on Friday too, called her because Jodi overslept that morning, and she said, "I'll be right in." So our image is she was rushing in, running late, hair is probably wet, and then she's just attacked from behind as she's getting into the car. And that was it.
Oh, gosh. You've been covering this case for a very, very long time. Why is Jodi's case so personal and important to you?
I think a number of things. For one thing, she was a Minnesotan. I mean, that was much more. She was a young woman from, even though she was in Iowa, there was that relatability. Said she's one of ours. We often hear with law enforcement about the extended family and how if an officer dies in another state that, often you see officers show up at services. That's how I feel that Jodi was one of ours doing what we do. And until I know otherwise, I'm open to the idea that it was connected to what she does, but she's part of the extended family. And I feel that we owe it to her to use our skills as diggers, as knowing how to get the message out. And we're doing it all in our own time. It's just, there's no reason. How can we not do it? I had a grandson ask me a few years ago, "How long are you going to do this, Grandma? When are you going to stop?" And his younger sister said, "Never." And I don't see an off ramp until we have answers. And maybe I'm showing up at a crime scene with my canes or whatever. I don't know. I hope it's not that long, but I just feel driven, and especially as you get to know the families. I've gotten to know her sister Joanne and some other family members, and you see what they're living with, and I can't imagine not doing it. It's not a story for me. It's nothing I'm doing. I did do stories at CCO. And the same with the rest of our team. I don't go too many hours of the day without thinking about what am I missing? What should we be doing? And we're always conferring and trying to brainstorm. And we've had a lot of rabbit holes. One day I got a tip on something and about a picture of somebody in a photo with Jodi that looked like somebody else who'd been a criminal. I thought, wow, this is it. So I sat in my car making calls, and by the end of the day, we figured out who it was. And there's just another rabbit hole, but it just like paralyzed me. Because one of these days, I remember when I got the call on Jacob, it was just shocking. And that I've heard that reports that he was found, and that was one of the most awful calls they ever. It wasn't probably the most awful call I've had her make, was reaching out to Patty Wetterling, and then I texted her, and she confirmed, and that was the first confirmation. And I just sat there and sobbed, and I was in my pajamas, California, couple hours difference, and took me a few minutes before calling the newsroom to call it in. And I went and I had a go bag already at home where I was living before, but I was in San Francisco where our kids are, so you can have all the preparation. And I think for that day with Jodi, what's that going to be like? I can't imagine the pain for her family when that happens. But worse is the ongoing pain, the ongoing lack of answers.
Right. No, I think about like you too, and we talked about this as being her same age. My mom's cancer diagnosis very young and given a not a good prognosis when in fact she lived 27 and a half years. But that led me to get out of wanting to be the anchor, going into sales so I could stay here in this market. That could have been me, as we talked about. That could have been anyone close to my age.
You nailed it. I mean, it's just so relatable. And I don't know if you can see this, my daughter gave me this necklace with 6/27/1995 for my birthday. It's a few days after the date when Jodi disappeared. And it was 7 or 8 years ago she gave it to me, and I wear it throughout June just to kind of, think, what can we do? What if we're your family member. My daughter was first out of college. She was working a morning show in San Luis Obispo newscast, and there was not a day that she was there that I wasn't on my mind what Jodi went through, or she'd tell me she'd gone down the hill to get a coffee, or like, no, just that fear and knowing that she was probably safe, but it was because of what happened to Jodi. I think I would have been concerned anyway, but more so because we know what happened to Jodi.
No, definitely. What is the status of the investigation? I know I've been reading and following you, and it looked like some documents were unsealed, etc. But for those who aren't caught up,
This past year has been a year of seemingly a lot of activity, and I think this given momentum and hope to the case. We saw there was a search in Winsted, Minnesota. Law enforcement got a tip. They went up there. It was a similar, we'd had a tip about someone in that area years ago. We don't know what got them going there again. Then there was a case, convicted serial killer or convicted killer, suspected serial killer in Wisconsin who had been convicted in Missouri, and he had a family connection in Mason City back in the mid-90s. We heard investigators from Mason City went there to talk with them, and that was in the news. And then you mentioned the documents. The main person of interest that's been in the news over the years passed away in December. So a PI who's worked with the family went to court in Iowa to try to get law enforcement to release some documents. Specifically in 2017, they put some tracking devices on his vehicle when he had gone to Iowa to provide some DNA samples. There was a federal grand jury that met and he was ordered. Didn't produce anything, but they've kept the search warrant affidavit, which is the part of the search warrant that's so key in terms of the facts of the case. It's been sealed. The argument the attorneys for the PI for the family said is, since this person can't be prosecuted now, it should be open. But Jodi's family strongly opposed it being open, as do the prosecutor. The concern being, you don't want to harm the investigation, even though somebody's gone. We don't know that that person did it. We know that there are facts of the case. And from my experience for decades on the crime beat, I can't remember a time, and probably there's some, but I don't remember a time when something's been shared with the public. Because one of the key things they're looking for is, what if it's something that hasn't been out that only a killer knows and somebody confesses? And we've seen that over the years. And you want to corroborate, make sure it's a real confession. For example, I don't know if you remember Paul Stefani, the serial voice killer. I covered him extensively, and he was convicted of several murders, suspected in some others. And right before he passed away in prison, he asked to talk to the detective. And not only did he admit to the ones he was convicted of, but he threw one else out there that involving a school teacher, Kathy Greening, who for years people had implicated someone close to her. Well, it turns out he knew this. Stefani mentioned one key detail that had never been public, and that is he put her purse in a mailbox. And so that was one of the corroborating things. Then they also found his name and phone number in her phone book later on. They went back. So you don't want to contaminate something, because there are false confessions, false whatever reasons. And so I would be, that's the sort of thing I'd be shocked if they'd ever. Yes, as a journalist, am I curious? I get asked that. Yes, but not at the expense of hurting the case. And as I said, the family feels strongly as well for the same reasons. The last thing they want at this point is to have something that could interfere with getting answers to what happened. And they want justice eventually to what happened to Jodi.
answers, justice, and a resolution.
Use that word instead of closure. Resolution. Yes.
Yes, I like that. And what can people do to help spread the word about Jodi?
There are a number of things. If you come to our website, we post things like a few months ago or a month or so ago, we created a new poster. Each year we update it, but this is a whole new one, and it mirrors our billboard with the messages 30 years, it's time. We ask people to put the flyers up in their community, particularly in southern Minnesota, northern Iowa, and then you can do it really anywhere in the world, or put it on electronically, put it up there with hashtag FindJodi. Who knows? I mean, I was in Paris in 2018 and put one up there. I thought, well, who might be passing through? And we saw a case out here just a few years ago, Kristen Smart, a missing Cal Poly student or a podcaster did a podcast, and somebody heard it, I believe, in Australia, who'd been at Cal Poly, the university at the time, and that was significant contribution to resolving the case. So we have lots going against the case because of lack of evidence, lack of witnesses, but we also have these tools all over the world, or just in their backyard. So, well, we welcome help on the journey. if you have something, you can contact us, contact the police. Or they're not interested if you've had a dream or you saw some show. And I mean, not to disrespect that, but you don't want to spend a lot of time chasing things that are basically distractions. But people mean, they mean well, and sometimes a hunch might be what leads them somewhere. But I know there's one guy we hear about regularly who's pretty interesting. He goes to Civil War reenactments, or he did, he's in prison. And there was a Civil War reenactment going on in the campgrounds behind Jodi's place the weekend before. Well, when I first heard that a few years ago, I was excited, but then I found that the person they're talking about was in prison. So you look at things, you chase them, and we spend a lot of time chasing things that don't go anywhere.
Well, and you also mentioned that sometimes there's even news stations reporting false information and how that can negatively impact this as well. Talk a little bit about that.
I think a lot of it's well intended, but things get, and it's not just stations, it's network. I mean, there's one national show that has repeatedly said that there was blood at the crime scene. There was no blood at the crime scene. But when people hear blood, the potential for DNA, and that is much stronger than some other sources. But I don't know why, and when the shows reach out and ask if I'll do an interview, I usually have my list of yes, but I want you to know these facts. And that's one of the reasons that we created first did it on the 27th, Jodi's 27th birthday, 27 facts on 27 years. Now we do 30, and I try to update it to have sort of a basic fact sheet. So if a lot of shows use our information, if they're going to do it, I try to and we've had things that weren't correct. So go through, try to be as diligent as we can to get it right. And another one we created this year was 30 facts about Jodi, just interesting things about her. And who knows, maybe there's some club you belong to, something that somebody might know, something in Iowa that might be relevant. And speaking of clubs, she was a very big supporter. I'll show you the Optimist Creed. And
Oh,
her family gave me this, but she was very much in the hope and optimism. And so if people want to kind of get the essence of Jodi, if you read that, gives you an idea of where
yeah. And that is posted. Is that posted anywhere or no?
go online if you just Google Optimist, the Optimist Creed. Yeah.
Oh, right. Absolutely. And for those that have been tuning in, throughout the show, you probably can see above this video is information about Jodi, the abduction, but also the links of FindJodi.com and her family Facebook page that was started in December. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yep, and that is Jodi's Hope, and the link there, so you can click on those as well. And feel free to private message Caroline and I as well. If you know something, say something, please. What else haven't we covered on this that our viewers should know?
I think we've covered it. It's I think the message, this is not an enduring mystery as we hear. This is somebody's daughter, somebody's sister, somebody's granddaughter, and somebody's aunt. And to kind of see it in that frame, and just if you think you know anything, and I'm convinced there are people out there that have some information, and maybe they're just uncomfortable, or maybe they've had a relative on things to look for. One of Holly mentioned at one of the at our anniversary thing, Holly, our investigator, did behavior change. You look for red flags. Is there somebody that on the anniversary, June 27th, do they act differently? Are there some things that do they talk about Jodi? I mean, a lot of people do talk about her, but is there something that doesn't feel right? Is that person someone that's obsessed? Does that person have any stalking in their behavior? And you can go to our Facebook page, and we put Holly's list of different things to look for. But take yourself back into what was in the news back then. What were the songs and some of those kinds of things, and get yourself in the frame, and maybe that'll trigger something. I often look at things of when I was pregnant at work. How did that fit in the timeline of things? So look for timelines, and again, particularly in northern Minnesota and northern Iowa and southern Minnesota, people in that area, if you have connections, think about it. And I hope you will put the numbers for the Mason City Police and Special Agent DCI Ryan Herman welcomes emails. So all that contact information's there.
I will. I'll go back in and add that in above. So in addition to those websites, so they can go directly to them if they know something or have information that would be relevant to the case.
That's great. Well, again, we so appreciate you're doing this. You never know that one person that we talk about we've had incredible amount of traffic to our website, to our Facebook page, but it's really not about the thousands. It's about one or two. And you hope in scope that we get that person. We've connected with a lot of people with information over the years. It hasn't found us Jodi, but bits and pieces, and we put out requests from time to time for, like, for example, we've never been able to find photos from the golf tournament with Mason City Chamber of Commerce the day before. We've done kind of crowdsourcing appeals, but we found other pictures, and you never know in a picture if something might have somebody that shows up that could be relevant. So
That's
we
interesting.
keep
Right.
using the tools that we have and keep going at it.
That's great. Well, and I want to thank you and your team that's been so diligent and for so many years and that you haven't given up. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. And for those who tune in to watch Around Town TV Tuesday evenings, next week we're going to switch gears to the Rock Candy Shop in Excelsior. And I'm really excited to have the owners on my show. Her husband was the Folsom Prison Experience around the holidays, and I had him on the show back then. So we'll switch gears to a little more positive candy from this. But so please tune in and join us next Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. Central Time. Carolyn, before we sign off, anything else you'd like to say?
No, I guess my message is it's time. Let's don't go another year. And if the person's watching, we're not going to stop. You know, we may take a break for a few days. It's been an intense month, but we're going to keep at it and do the right thing. And
It's
you don't have to implicate yourself, but come forward. Tell us somebody where Jodi is. Point us in that direction. Let Jodi be brought home to Long Prairie, Minnesota to be with her loved ones.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It is time. So please, if anyone knows, we're asking you to come forward. And thank you again. And I will stay in touch with you and any other developments that we could share with my viewers at any time. Please don't hesitate to reach out.
Great. I was going to mention one last thing. We do have a video of our event that we did with Jodi to honor Jodi on Friday. That's, maybe you can put it on your site, but I think if you hear the stories from the people closest, I'd love it if someone knows something to listen to those stories and see if that doesn't move you to do the right thing and come forward.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's maybe there's something that'll resonate with somebody or somebody who knows somebody. I will do that. So I'll add that. I'll add all the police information as well. Go back in and thank you again.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll see you all hopefully joining us next Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. Central Time, right here on Around Town TV. We'll see you then. Thank you.